This one is called Fault Line. With some of these stories, I enjoy starting, or I don't know if I enjoy it, but it helps me come up with some idea. Just to back up for a sec, sometimes you're taking a walk, or you're driving around, or in the shower or whatever, something where you get an idea, or sometimes lying in bed, and it comes to you. That would make an interesting story or short story. I wonder how I'd resolve that, or it might be very closely based on some incident. Maybe you read something in the newspaper and it triggered an idea. Or you heard something from a friend or so. You never know where they're going to come from. But what I'm saying is sometimes you get a more established, more well-rounded story idea before you get started. Other times you have nothing. So what I've done in those cases, I give myself a little pressure. I want to, write a short story this week, whatever I'm trying to do. I just start with a one-line setup. And then I just figure it out. I don't plot it at all. I just figure, where's it going to go from here? So in this particular setup, it was simple. The simple sentence was, someone's doorbell rings at 4 a.m. And I really didn't have any preconceived notion. So I just started with that. Then I thought, okay, I'm going to have a couple wake up. So I have this couple, kind of this, old, middle-aged to older couple who was upstairs. The doorbell rings. They're kind of a straight couple. The guy's very conservative guy, everything by the book. They have either one or more kids out of the house. So they're sort of at that point in life. I don't know if the guy's retired. He might be kind of retired or partially retired. But anyway, the doorbell rings. He, what was that, etc. They kind of panic. He comes lumbering downstairs, and it's a cop. But it's a cop we knows. The guy lives in the neighborhood. They live in a little suburban kind of tract neighborhood with a cul-de-sac, and the cop is his friend from down the block, and the families get together once a year, have a barbecue, and I think he plays on like an old seniors softball team with this guy, and the guy he's a friendly guy, and the guy right away is putting up his hands. Don't worry, no big deal. That's why I didn't bring the squad car. I didn't want to scare you. But the guy goes on to tell him that he's been on the job tonight, and that unfortunately this guy's daughter-in-law, the couple's daughter-in-law who gets woken up, got arrested on his shift. He happened to see her brought into the station house, and he saw that the guy's son there trying to bail her out and whatever, and the cop didn't know a lot of details except there might have been some sort of a get together, a party or something, and the woman hit another woman, I think might have been with a heavy duty kitchen implement. Very out of character. And so that's how it starts off. This guy gets delivered that information with his wife. He's standing there in his robe at 4 a.m. and then kind of tries to piece it together. Who's being straight? Who's telling the truth here? And I try to, keep the reader a little bit off balance with that one. It's not very long, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. Fault Line. Fault Line. What the heck? Edna said, sitting up. Was that the doorbell? Nick said. It sure sounded like it. Please be careful. Nick found his slippers and lumbered down the stairs. Through the side glass, he could see a car at the bottom of the driveway, which looked like Andy's, so he opened the door. Andy was wearing a baseball cap and an overcoat, and right away he smiled and held his hands up, like everything's fine, this is no big deal, and sorry to wake you up. I didn't want you freaking out, he said, so I didn't bring the squad car. It's okay, Nick said, nervous. What do you got? So, your daughter-in-law is Katie, right? Griffin? They brought her in. Wait, Katie's all right? She's fine. but she hit someone in the face, a woman, allegedly, with some kind of kitchen implement. My God, Nick said. That's inconceivable. You sure? What woman? Reason I even picked up on it, I was doing paperwork, getting ready to take my lunch. 2 a.m, but you know what I mean. Anyhow, I see Johnny waiting up front. Oh no, did he take her home then? She should be loose in a few hours, Andy said. Has she had any violent tendencies in the past that you're aware of? Wait, you're interrogating me now? Nicky, not at all, just trying to help out. Get to the bottom of it. Andy lived down the block. They played on the same old man softball team, and once a year the two families got together for a barbecue. Shame on you, Nick said, and closed the door. Edna was standing there in her robe. No point trying to sleep anymore, do you think? She said. I suppose not, Nick said. Shall we call Johnny? Why not wait a while, have some coffee? I'm happy to do drip or the machine, hon, whichever you prefer. You never liked her, did you? Nick said. Edna sat down on a stair. Why do you do this? She said. I mean, I get it. The mother-in-law and the only child business, but you could have at least disguised it better. Okay, Edna said, you are probably correct, her voice cracking slightly. We have any bacon? Nick said. When Nick walked in, Katie's parents, Max and Noreen, were sitting in the living room with Johnny. They got up and there were timid hugs all around. She's upstairs, Johnny said before Nick could ask. Mom come too? In the car, Nick said. She didn't feel like socializing this morning. Now you mind telling me what the fuck happened? Sorry, Noreen. Or is this a bad dream? Max cleared his throat and spoke up. Nick, this is awfully stressful for everyone, but we need to keep it civil. Oh yeah? Nick said. Well, how about you civilly tell me about it, or I may have to hit you in the head. Max said, Sorry, Johnny, we're going to take off. We'll be in touch soon. Please tell Katie don't worry. When they'd driven away, Johnny said, Way to go, Dad. I always knew I could count on you in a crisis. That's my fault then, Nick said. But who'd she hit? Oh, some gal. We were at a party, a bunch of English department folks, and apparently there was a point of contention. They were in the kitchen, and Katie, she waxed this person with a big serving spoon. Jesus. Blood? That was the problem. There was a lot. Her nose. What compounded it, though, Katie hit her a couple more times. Cut her up a bit. Unbelievable. She okay now, though? The victim? I think so. Spent a few hours in the ER, is my understanding, and then got released. You knew her? The woman? I've seen her here and there. She's a first-year grad student. Nick stood outside. Edna was reading a paperback in the car. Nick looked outside. Edna was reading a paperback in the car. Johnny said, I know, it's so entirely out of character. You think you know someone, but... What now? Nick said. Well, when she's ready, she'll come down. Wasn't my question. Oh, so there's a court date and a lawyer. The Griffins are taking care of it, of course. When? A couple weeks, and a mental health evaluation was also mentioned. She have any history? Show any signs? Forget that, Nick said. They stopped for lunch at Chick-fil-A in Walnut Creek. Edna said, Remember when we were here last? The young man at the counter told us the story about the basketball players? Yeah, the Warriors, Nick said. Supposedly Curry and Thompson ran into each other here by accident. Both half white guys, incidentally. What could that possibly have to do with anything? I'm just saying. Thompson went for 60 Tuesday night, by the way, against Indiana. On the other thing, though, it add up or what? Well, why don't you ask Andy to look into it further? That mope, Nick said. He enjoyed telling us. He did, Edna said. Thursday morning, Nick looked up from the newspaper and said, "We'll get through this. Let's invite everyone for dinner." "Kind of short notice," Edna said. Nick said, "Tell them to come. Don't ask." Edna made her lasagna, and Nick picked up a couple racks of ribs from Costco and fired up the outdoor grill. Max and Noreen showed up first, and Nick acted like nothing had happened the other day, which seemed a logical way to handle it. After the first round of martinis, Max told a Donald Trump joke, which Nick resented, but he let it go and pretended to laugh. Katie looked pretty good considering. She and Johnny arrived arm in arm and smiled a lot, and you wouldn't have known they were all in a situation, except that Katie had politely said hello to everyone, and then that was about it. That first weekend Johnny brought her up to the cabin in Tahoe. When they got a chance to know her, Nick was hoping this was the one. Now he couldn't help wondering if Katie was slightly off her rocker, and he watched and listened to Max and Noreen in ways he hadn't before to see if there was some kind of genetic clue. There were after-dinner drinks, and Nick made a fire, and they sat around playing cards, no one too concerned about it being a weeknight. It was starting to drag on, but Nick figured a little unification never hurt. Close to midnight, the doorbell rang. Nick excused himself and answered it, and it was Andy, walking the dog. "Couldn't help noticing the gang's all here," he said with a big smile. Nick thinking, in a perfect world, I'd deck 'em for sure. "Yeah, well, we're a little busy," he said. "So unless you've got something, I'm going to wrap up this little conversation." Andy said quietly, "He was banging her, is what it appears now." Nodding. "Johnny." Nick was trying to digest it. "Word is she's dropping the charges," Andy said. "You might ask him if he spoke to her." Nick watched Andy go, cutting across the lawn, then pausing while the dog inspected a bush. There was a plate noise in the dining room, and Edna was serving a second round of pie and ice cream. "Who on earth was that?" Max said. "Just a neighbor out," Nick said. "Saw we were up." "Gosh, your neighborhood is so different than ours then," Noreen said. "No one would think of ringing the bell after 9 at the latest." "Well, two ways to look at that," Max said. "Our deal, we're more spread out, there's privacy, but here you've got the interaction." "Depending," Edna said. Nick said to Katie, "Sweetie, mind if we take a walk?" Katie hesitated. She had an apron on and had been helping Edna in the kitchen. "That'd be fine, I guess," she said. "Hold on, Dad," Johnny said. "What are you doing?" She obviously does mind. "I'm talking just a little air. It's nice right now," Nick said, holding up his hands like Andy at 4 a.m. "Nothing to do with the other nonsense, so don't have a conniption fit." "Kay," Johnny said. "It's all good," Katie said, and got her coat. They walked the other direction from Andy's house. After half a block, Nick said, "The thing of it is, I've been trying hard to picture it, and I can't see you swinging a spoon at someone." Katie said, "It's certainly not something I would have predicted." "So my son then, he caused it," Nick said. "I beg your pardon?" "It's okay. That's a good quality you have. I never thought I'd be figuring out a way to injure my offspring, but that's what I'm working on." "Johnny played no part in this. Something snapped. I'm a bit worried about myself, actually." I see. You were socializing with this person, talking restaurants and music and movies, and then you flew off the handle, so to speak. Pretty much, yes. They got to the end of the cul-de-sac and turned around. Nick said, well, that moon tonight, the orange, it's special, you know it? It really is, Katie said. Nick had a service that cleaned the leaves out of his rain gutters. He used to do it all himself, but as his knees bothered him more, it didn't seem worth it to do all that climbing. He still took care of the first floor, the low ones, but he left the high stuff for the pros. Saturday, Johnny was up on the ladder instead of the service. It was a little early in the season. You might still have to redo the job, but Johnny was happy to help out. Nick hadn't confronted him, but suspected Johnny was aware that he knew and would do anything to make amends. It was just the two of them. Edna was doing an all-day art workshop in Santa Cruz. They took a lunch break and put the ladder on the side of the house, and Johnny got back up there. He was right above his old childhood room, gloves on, reaching right, sweeping out the leaves and dropping them down in fluttering bunches. The other night after everyone left, Nick had watched a YouTube video on extension ladder safety. He'd always had the impression that when you lean too far, the risk is the ladder sliding sideways. It turns out that's wrong, that the ladder actually starts spinning around. Whatever. Nick waited until Johnny made his most off-balance reach, the furthest one for that little section before they'd have to move the ladder. It was harder than he thought, but with both hands on the bottom left and some elbow grease, Nick persuaded the thing to start rolling, and it looked a lot like the demonstration in the video. Nick yelling out, "Whoops!" and Johnny not making any noise but scrambling to grab the vinyl gutter and pulling it down with him the 2 stories. The side yard was dirt, and Johnny seemed dazed but okay. Nick had hoped he'd break something, not his neck or anything, but at least have some damage inflicted that he'd have to deal with for a while. "Geez, man, what happened up there?" Nick said. Johnny staggered inside and laid on the couch, and Nick got him some water. A few minutes later there was an ambulance, which was kind of surprising, but Nick supposed someone had seen it and overreacted, and what could you do? They took Johnny in for observation. Around dinner time, Andy showed up again, this time with the squad car. There was another uniformed guy with him. Andy said, "We'd like you to come down, answer a few questions there, bud." "You would?" Nick said. "The boy says you did it on purpose." "That's crazy, Peterson. You know me a whole lot better than that." "Oh, and something else," Andy said. Nick's silent now. "We got a cute little new assistant DA's been working on your other case." "Caught up with her yesterday. Like I say, very easy on the eyes." "Come on," Nick said. "What it turns out, it wasn't him doing the banging after all." "No, it was her, messing with some dude. Pretty sure your boy was aware of it. I guess you'd call it a catfight. The other girlfriend. Factor in a little alcohol, and there you have it." "You're putting me on," Nick said. "This little ADA, she's good. Dug around at the college and such. That's where they work, right? Johnny and Katie? So's the other guy." Nick took a minute. "Fuck me," he said.